So I think these two do not really need an introduction, but I would love to welcome you both and thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
I just wanted to start with COP while we're here, and we are all here for the same reasons. So start with you, Carter. I'd just love to hear from you about your experience so far at COP, what you've seen, what you're here for, what you're hoping to see what you've seen from the first week and what you're hoping to see, this week.
So I've been to a lot of COPs since Copenhagen, and they're all different. This COP has been, I think the headlines are going to be incremental commitments by countries, not as much as the world would like to see, but serious incremental commitments. The other headline is going to be big money has shown up in the form of commitments by financial institutions in a huge way, and also the commitments by corporations to get to net zero, which implies significant investments, both in their supply chains and in their own four walls and beyond. My experience being in the hallways, though, has been much more bilaterals to move things against those commitments. And that reflects a pivot from Copenhagen and Paris, which were all about big commitments, not enough about action. The other two things I'd say is you're seeing the rise of nature as a fundamental part of getting after climate change, and you're seeing the rise of the significance and importance and the imperative of engaging indigenous communities, local communities, and making sure they benefit from whatever solutions are mounted.
Great. Grant?
Yeah, so unlike Carter, this is my very first COP. And the reason I really wanted to attend this one was to add my voice, I think, to the level of urgency that we have to have. I think it's pretty clear that we're heading for, at best, a 3-degree world right now, and we really need to be at 1.5. And the reason I wanted to come was to add my personal voice, the voice of Mars, and really talk to a number of countries and other CEOs to really get that sense of urgency and action. I think net zero is a bit of a free-for-all right now, and I think we need clearer definition, clearer commitments, and clear action coming out of COP, and that's the reason I'm adding my energy behind it.
Yeah. And also, you are Scottish, so it must be nice to
be
helps.
Home.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say, I need to lend my Scottish voice and accent.
Yes, that seems to flow naturally, Carter.
So that's a good question. I think the message of credibility and kind of a little bit of that commitment fatigue that we're hitting right now. I think obviously there's so many different net zero targets out there, but how are we measuring them? Maybe Carter, start a little bit with you. Like, what are your thoughts on how we can maybe overcome that target fatigue that we're hitting right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think any of us who were in New York around the big declaration before us knows that it was a bit of like a lemon meringue, where there was a lot of volume and not as much substance as we should have seen, and not much action taken, frankly, against that. The world is much less sanguine that commitments are all that matters, and the world is demanding transparency, accountability, monitoring, tracking, and not just voluntary commitments and tracking by a company, but also commitments that are required, and tracking and reporting that's required by regulators, by financial institutions, and by their own employees, and by customers. And so all eyes are on that, and you're absolutely right, Grant. There is a profound need to sort out the confusion around net zero, to sort out the confusion around how do you pursue these in a way that has real integrity. And I think that's where the action is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And how are you working to kind of address that on your end?
Yeah, I think people are right. I think it's not so much target fatigue as failure to hit target fatigue.
Right.
If we were hitting the targets, I think people would actually be energized. So I think we need real clarity around the metrics and standards we're aiming for, clarity around what is scope 1, 2, 3. So that's everything from the farm right through to consumer. We have to be taking our greenhouse gas emissions through our complete supply chain. And then people will lose fatigue when they see us delivering. And that's why I think we need interim targets between now and 2050 to show that we're actually on the right trajectory over time. We can't wait until December 2049 to produce something out of the bag. We've got to start now. We've got to get action now. And we're really committed to that.
Yeah.
So if I could just add, I think the applause should be there when companies make commitments. I think the applause should be loud when they make progress against their commitments.
Right. And I think, you know, what I always see at these, talking to companies, it's really important that we do have people making those commitments, and we want to encourage them to continue to make those and work towards them, and everybody is at different parts of their journey. So I completely agree with that. So talking a little bit more about forests, as you were talking about the forest announcement in New York, moving to forests a little bit, you know, what is some of the work that you're doing at WWF to really address deforestation, and why is it so important, as you mentioned, to really make sure that we're taking care of our ecosystem?
Yeah, so just before I talk about forests, the bottom line is you can't solve climate change without nature, and you can't save nature without addressing climate change. And forests loom large at the center of this because deforestation and land use occupy fully 30 to 35% of all emissions in the world. You all know that. It is also because they perform other services. They provide a source of water. The Amazon is the weather engine for Latin America, many, many other things. And so forests are key. Deforestation commitments are a key part of the supply chain commitments that companies make. And the things that WWF has started to work on is some nature positive solutions. We just announced a partnership with HP that commits serious money to restore forests in the Atlantic forest of Brazil to offset the paper used in the copiers. But we are also mounting large nation-scale initiatives called Enduring Earth that expands park systems, keeps them intact with an ongoing performance-based financial mechanism that endures over time. And the last thing I would say on forests is if you don't find a way to engage local communities and indigenous people so they not only have a voice in how those initiatives work, but they benefit, then those projects through the ups and downs of government are not going to last. And so that's a huge imperative, and we now incorporate that into the biggest projects that we do.
And so obviously palm oil is a big part of a product that you use at Mars, and you've made the commitment to make all palm oil used for your company deforestation free. So can you talk a little bit about that program and what you've been doing and how you're really working to address the supply chain?
Yeah, sure. So first I agree with you, Carter. I mean, deforestation has to stop, and we've got to get forest positive. And I'm fortunate to lead the Consumer Goods Forum group, which is 20 key companies with a new theory of change going after stopping deforestation. But for Mars specifically, we were buying palm oil, as most people. Palm oil, first of all, is I think, the poster child for deforestation for many people. And we had about 1,500 suppliers that we were buying from, just like everybody else, on a commodity basis, a very transactional relationship. We've actually cut that down to about 90 suppliers who we are working very closely with, and we actually map that where the product is coming from, either with feet on the ground or satellite, and we're mapping, monitoring, and managing that very closely. So we're very confident we've got palm oil, which is deforestation free.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what are some of the criteria that you used when choosing which of the suppliers that you stuck with out of that number?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly straightforward. It starts with a coalition of the willing. Who's really sees the challenge the same as us, who's prepared to really transform the supply chain, because this is not easy. When we're talking about transformation of your supply chain, and just to put that in perspective, so we're probably one of the few companies where our head of sustainability is also head of procurement. And so you go in there not only with a knowledge of what needs to be done from a sustainability perspective, but also with some of the financial, if you like, power to help drive those changes. So we're looking for suppliers who have the same inspiration, same aspiration as ourselves, who want to really make a difference.
Yeah. And Carter, just from your perspective, what are some of the ways that we can incentivize these suppliers a little bit?
Yeah, well, first of all, the signals from buyers and companies like Mars matter a lot. Whether it's Mars or Walmart, when you are in the buyer's room and you're negotiating, it's not just about price, it's also about the quality and what was behind the production of those raw materials. But on the ground, in terms of incentives, what matters a lot is that they get a fair price for what they're producing. It also matters a lot that there are financial mechanisms that help them make that transition. Mars is one of the pioneers of what we call long-term contracts that provide enough assurance for producers that they can make the transition, particularly in planting trees that sometimes take 10 years to achieve their full productivity, and providing that kind of assurance throughout. But the last thing I would say is this. It is not enough to just have market signals. It's not enough to just have long-term contracts. You also need governance, and you need governments that are going to put in place on a jurisdictional level the right kind of laws and enforce them so that the good actors flourish and the bad actors have to change. Because what you don't want to do is just have good actors working with good actors, and the bad actors, what we know is they have a disproportionate impact on ecosystems. So it's inescapable. You need strong regulations and enforcement by governments.
So I know you both have been working, while you're both on stage together, you have been working together on a lot of these supply chain issues. I know that you recently launched the Renewable Thermal Collaborative. So tell me a little bit about that partnership. Maybe, I don't know if you want to start with you, Carter, and we can hand it over to Grant, and how you've been working together. So
one thing I've learned in all of our work with companies is beware of generalizing about companies. They're all different. They all have different ownership structures. They all have different boards. They all have different cultures. Our work with Mars has been fantastic from top to bottom, from the board all the way down to every employee. And this has been a long-standing partnership. Mars, historically, was very quiet. In fact,
until I came along.
I mean, very quiet and very private. And it was only more recently has come out with the kind of commitments and the progress that they made. We've worked with them on sustainable seafood, which is a big part of their pet care business. We've worked with them a lot on renewable electricity. And they were one of the founding partners of the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, which we helped create along with many other NGOs, which is basically a trade association of the biggest buyers of renewable energy in the United States, who use their purchasing power and their leverage of being able to either place a plant in a state or not, with all the jobs that creates, and use that to move the state toward better policies that enable you to scale up renewable energy. Mars came to us and said, we still have this problem with the heat we use in our production. And that led us to create the Renewable Thermal Collaborative, which aims to do the same. And in the United States, renewable thermal energy is a third of the problem in the energy sector, and I'm really looking forward to progress being made on that.
Great, and how has it helped you, really meet your sustainability goals at Mars, working with WWF?
Yeah, so from our perspective, it probably sounds like it's quite an idyllic relationship, but I can tell you they're very challenging. And that's good, because we have some gargantuan issues to solve, and we need candor. We need knowledge, we need capability. We can't do this alone. And we recognize fairly early on that we need uncommon collaboration to solve climate change, as well as some of the things that Carter just mentioned, whether it's government, NGOs, etc. So in our relationship, they set a very high standard on so marine stewardship. What do we need to do to really have a sustainable fish program, which is important to us. So I think it's a really unique combination of, telling you things that you sometimes don't really want to hear. And I think you've been very candid in that. We appreciate that. Challenging, but also I think what is a little different, and I would encourage other groups to do this, is also provide support, knowledge, and a helping hand along the way. Because I think people are inspired when you say, you know what, you did that well, here's what we need from you. And I think it's that combination of direct, candid feedback with the support when sometimes everybody gets a little fatigued. Yeah. And I think that's, we've managed to keep each other driving forward into some of the new areas that you just heard about.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are irascible and challenging, and Grant's right. That's what companies expect from us. And frankly, our brand, the association, does not matter if we become a shill. Yeah. It matters because we challenge and we set high science-based standards, and then challenge companies to honor and deliver on them.
But feel free to ease up on that occasionally.
We are almost out of time, unfortunately, so I did want to end with one important question, which is just how do we, obviously we need employees, we need communities, we need the consumers to start really driving some of this change. So how do you work on both of your ends to really try to engage with them and figure out how to move the needle on their practices and their beliefs? I'll start with you, Carter.
Okay, thanks. So I think we all know that all the work with companies on supply chains and the rest helps make a huge dent in emissions, particularly as it relates to food. But it would be a lie to say that is the whole solution. The other half of the equation is what consumers buy, what they demand, and the choices they make. And so we are very much determined to make consumers aware of the consequences of the choices they make, while pulling up short and more generally of telling consumers exactly what to eat, because that's a very personal choice, of making sure they know the consequences of what they eat and making that clear. I think it is for companies with large brands like Mars, to use your brand and your marketing prowess to send those signals, engage consumers is super important. We've worked with Procter & Gamble in doing that to educate consumers that cold water detergent is in fact just as good as hot water wash cycles, and so that their behavior shifts. But the other thing to me is about engaging your employees. And employees increasingly don't just want to make money. They want to be on the side of solving the world's problems and really listening to your employees, responding to them, and concocting solutions with them is profoundly important, and we're seeing more and more companies do that too.
Yeah, I'd reiterate much of that. So it starts with your associate base. Employees we call associates. We have 135,000 of them. And the sense of purpose, the world we want tomorrow, starts with how we do business today. It's really a rallying cry for all of our associates, and I think gets us all directed in the same direction. Similarly, we're very rare in that our top management all have long-term incentives, which are equivalent not only on our financials, but on what we're doing for society. That's very unusual, equally weighted. And then I think taking out to the consumers, and you've seen recently for Mars Bar, which I think is an iconic confectionery brand in the UK. I grew up on that. And we've said we're going to be net zero on Mars Bar by January 1st, 2023. And that's a way to start communicating with consumers, start that interaction. But it's going to take a lot. I think lots of experimentation in store with brands, keep the communication going, simplify the communication because it's just so complex for consumers out there. And last but not least, everybody in this room, the fact that you're here, you're bringing your voice to this important issue and spreading that through your contacts. You put it all together, we will get change.
Great. Thank you both so much for your time. Carter Roberts, Grant Reid, thank you all so much for listening.
All right.